Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah, chapter 3, Halacha 7. A little bit about this Mishnah and the sugya. Quick little discussion about it. The Gemara is going to a set of topics now that's going to be dealing with transfer of property where there's going to be some sort of encumbrance. It's going to talk about what happens if there's a deathbed will, or if somebody tries to collect a ketubah, or other types of transfers of land or property. But there's something in that deal that has an encumbrance on the property that makes it complicated. So why are the Chachamim putting this in here? They're putting this set of halachot in here to help us to understand about selling land that hasn't had the peah taken out yet, or that the new buyer has this sort of theoretical peah obligation somewhere in the crop, and who's going to be obligated to do it. So it's really kind of not out of nowhere. Just like over here, where if you're selling land that hasn't had peah taken out yet, there's going to be a peah encumbrance in there somewhere. And just like over here, if you're making a deathbed will to transfer property to somebody, there's also an encumbrance because perhaps the person doesn't die at all, and then there's a thing where it's an encumbrance. It's not the same kind of transaction as if one person just handed something that was free and clear to another person. So that's why this is going to be in here, and we're going to get into the other thing, which is this fifth opinion. We know that last Mishnah they were talking about these four opinions for the minimum size of land needed for the pay obligation. And now we're going to get into Rabbi Akiva's opinion about this law and other laws that apply to this size of land. So before we start, I just want to point out a couple of definitions for this. One of the things is there's going to be something called a prose bull, and we know that Hillel established the prose bull because there were a lot of people that wanted to get around issuing debt before the Shemitah year. We know that in the Shemitah year, the debts are canceled, and people just stopped lending. And we know that a lot of people started to be dishonest, and they would take out loans with the idea of canceling them in the Shemitah and never repaying them. That, by the way, is a form of theft. So because of this, Hillel established a prose bull where somebody can, they can't circumvent the cancellation of the debts, and what's happening is they're writing the debt where it's secured by the land and it's held by a bet din, so that there's no way for this person to cheat and cancel the debts, and that it's trying to maintain the spirit of the Jewish law, even in a generation that was less honest. The other thing I want to point out about Bikurim is brought from the 7 species singled out by the Torah for the praise of Eretz Yisrael, and we know that from Devarim in 8:8, and those are wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. And when we're going to be talking about it here for the size of a piece of land, Rabbi Akiva is going to be talking about wheat and barley, since grain needs the smallest amount of land for sustenance versus any of those other 5 species. So let's look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Akiva says, land of any size whatsoever is subject to the requirement of peah. So when Rabbi Akiva is looking at this word in Leviticus 19:19, seeing the word pa'at, sedecha, the term corner of your field, he's referring to a field any size whatsoever. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. And he's saying, according to the Rosh Cirillo, that even a minute one, so that the Rosh Cirillo says that even a spot on the ground so small that it contains only a single stalk would qualify as a field for Peah, according to what Rabbi Akiva is trying to teach us. So he says land of any size whatsoever is subject to the requirements of Peah and of Bikurim, and is fit to write a prose bull on its account, and to acquire movable property along with it by means of money, a document, or proprietary act. So here they're putting together this piece of land, minute piece of land, and they're saying that in terms of Bikurim, that this minute amount of produce, if it grew this minute amount, that it would still be subject to the first fruits, and that you can't get around it. In other words, that piece of land that grows that small stalk of wheat, that first fruits are still going to be obligated to be taken from there, says Rabbi Akiva, and the requirements of Peah are still going to be there on that, and that you can use that piece of land, even though it's minute, to secure for a prose bull, to secure a debt, so that it's not so insignificantly small that it wouldn't count. In other words, it has some sort of halachic standing that even though very, very small, it can still be included and counted for a prose bull, and can be secured. That can be used as a piece of land, no matter how small, to secure it in this prose bull. And they can, and people can acquire it. People can acquire, with money and the document and the proprietary act. So in Kiddushin, in the Mishnah in 1.5, and you can check that in the Bavli on page 26, the laws of acquisition provide for taking legal possession of movable objects through a mechanism called meshchicha, which is moving the object that is being acquired to a private or semi-private domain. And taking legal possession of land, on the other hand, is effected by means of money, document, or proprietary act, such as locking the gate. And the Mishnah over there further teaches that although normally these modes of transfer of ownership are not effective on movables, when somebody does acquire movables along with land, the acquisition of the land of any of these three methods is effective for the accompanying movables as well. So the Mishnah is teaching that this accompanying transfer of movables is effective even if only the slightest parcel of land is being transferred. So why are they talking about movables? We know that halakhically speaking, if the stalk is still attached to the ground, it's considered to be like the ground. But if the stalk gets cut, now the stalk is considered to be movable. So that you have in here a few things of you have acquisition of land with a document where it's a permanent piece of land, and then you have an acquisition of movables, and in the case of movables, those would be something like cut stalks. So we can see how this is going to really get into all sorts of property transfer and encumbrances of property. And don't forget, unless the Peah is separated and left, the Peah obligation is still there in this produce somewhere. It's still an encumbrance. That's why the Mishnah is organizing this and putting this in this area. We want to know how small a piece of land do you have to do, but also there's a thread of property rights that's been running through chapter 3, and now we're getting to a head to talk about how the property rights are going to be working on this. So we were just talking about how Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah was talking about various other contexts in which land of any size is legally significant. And now it's going to get into this law of the sickbed gift. Just a quick thing about the sickbed gift. Let's say a person goes and he makes a verbal declaration, and he's seriously ill, and there's real fear of dying. Uh, the sick bed the sick bed gift can be done orally, and it's it has a valid act of acquisition when it's made. And if it weren't, the rabbis enacted the law in order to spare him a lot of anxiety, the person dying, that from um, the verbal orders of the sickbed, that there'd be no legal effect and it would not be carried out. And a gift made under these conditions, the sickbed gift, it takes effect upon the sick person's death. But that's the contract. That's, even though it's a orally done thing, that it doesn't trigger until the guy's death. That's the point of it triggering. But if the person doesn't die, it's null, because if he recovers, he doesn't do it. So a seriously ill person has the legal quality of a sickbed gift only when it's clear that he's motivated to give a gift out of apprehension that he's about to die. But in the case that this is not his motivation, the normal laws governing gift transactions are going to apply to the bequest. In other words, it can be effected only through an act of acquisition, and the transfer is non-revocable. So this is a special case where normally for gifts they are non-revocable, and in this case for the deathbed gift, it only triggers when he dies, and if it doesn't come to be, that it's not a transfer at all. So the Mishnah writes, regarding one who writes over his property to others while he's seriously ill. In other words, he's not even doing the oral thing, he's actually writing a contract. The law is as follows: if he leaves land of any size whatsoever for himself, his gift to the other stands, even if he should recover from the illness. If, however, he does not leave land of any size whatsoever for himself, but rather gives it all away, his gift does not stand in the event that he recovers for his illness. So why are they talking about this? Why this distinction between if he has any kind of land whatsoever for himself, the gift is going to stand should he recover, and if he turns over everything, including the land, and then he recovers, that the gift does not take effect. And the reason why is because they wanted to make sure that the person had some sort of way to support himself, and if the person was making a gift and he turned over everything, including the way to support himself, we can see it's really and truly a sickbed gift, because he's not even taking any care of if he recovers. In other words, this sick person believes so strongly that he's about to die that he turns over everything, including what he could use to support himself should he recover. And so the Hachamim are saying that in the case of the gift of any size, in other words, the land of any size, he's keeping some for himself, it's saying that he's just giving a gift, and maybe it's not a sickbed gift. But we know that gifts are you can't take them back, and that because he's still keeping stuff for himself, they're saying it's not really a sickbed gift. But if he gave everything, including land that he could use to sustain himself, then it really truly is a sickbed gift. That's basically what the Mishnah is getting at. And then the Mishnah is going to proceed to discuss another case in which the land of any size suffices, and this case involves the wife's right to a ketubah. And the Mishnah says, if one writes over his properties to his son in a will, and he assigns his wife land of any size whatsoever, and she indicates her acceptance of this arrangement, that's the key, by the way. She has to accept. She has to indicate an acceptance of the arrangement. The Mishnah continues, says she forfeited her right to collect her ketubah from the properties given to the sons. So let me look at the Rashbam commentary on Bavli Baba Batra 132a to help us with this. And here's how it reads. It says, ordinarily, a woman can collect her ketubah from properties that were sold or given away by her husband because she has a lien on his properties. And in this case, however, we understand from her acceptance of his will that she waived her lien from the properties assigned to the sons. Had this not been her intent, she would not have indicated acceptance. Rather, she would have protested that the portion allotted to her in the will was insufficient, and in view of the larger amount that was due to her on the ketubah. So, since she indicated her acceptance, it is assumed that she waived her rights of collecting from these properties. But this is true only if she assigned some property, or she is assigned some property in the will. And if she's not assigned any property, then we would certainly assume that she would not accept this arrangement, and that she only feigned acceptance so as not to aggravate her husband. But land of any size whatsoever, however, suffices for us to draw the conclusion that she means to truly accept her husband's distribution and forego her ketubah lien. So that what's happening is that we can understand her to be waiving her ketubah lien only if the husband distributed all of his real property, the land and things attached to it. And since under Talmudic law, ketubah is collectible only from real property, it follows that in this case, the husband left the wife with nothing from which to collect her ketubah, and thus she certainly could have protested against this planned distribution if she intended to collect her ketubah. If, however, the husband left some of his real property undistributed, then she can collect her ketubah from the property, even if this property proves to be insufficient, and we would not assume that she waived her right to be paid from the distributed properties. So, just want to point out that now, however, from a Geonic enactment, the ketubah is payable even from the husband's personal properties like movables. So you can see the Rambam's commentary in Hilchot Ishus 16:5. But we're talking about a Talmudic argument, and we're talking about, whether the wife has forfeited the ketubah and exchanged it for this right of other property, and that's really what it's talking about. And by the way, she has to consent. That's effectively what's happening is it's effectively a change against her ketubah, and you can't just change the ketubah without her consent. So that if it were done in a way that was extremely disadvantageous to her, and even if she consented, that you could say that, well, it was not really consent, that perhaps she was afraid of her husband or whatever, and that it's not a real thing. For instance, if he assigned away everything and really didn't leave her anything and totally changed the terms of the ketubah, and even if she verbally said yeah whatever, that's not a real consent. That's what they're saying. So again, it has to be where she really accepts this, because they're changing this. They're changing the lien. There's a lien on his property, on his real property. And then today, not only his real property, but also the movable property. But in the terms of the what the Mishnah is talking about, and the Gemara is going to be talking about, we're talking about real property. So just like you have a transfer of real property that might have crops still on it, that Peah was not taken out of it yet, you're still going to have this encumbrance as well. There's going to be, somebody has to take Peah out. So the Mishnah is going to finish up, and it's going to say, Rabbi Yossi says, if she indeed accepted this arrangement, then even though she did not write the will, but only declared it orally, she has forfeited the right to collect her ketubah from the properties given to the son. So perhaps you can imagine a more straightforward explanation. Perhaps they got married and they became hugely successful, and they have lots and lots of farms, and they made a lot of money over living together with 40 years, and now they have a lot of sons, Baruch Hashem, and they wanna will a lot of it over. And so perhaps the ketubah was written in a way where it was a large amount, and it was written in a way where it was written where it was something like, and she has a claim on 25% of his real property, something like that. And that real property becomes very, very large. Perhaps they have fields and fields and fields all over the place, so much that there's no way for her to ever use it in her lifetime. And it's just a vast amount of money. You can imagine somebody who's like a millionaire or a billionaire today, that they have so much money that you can just never use it. So what they want to do is they want to change the terms of the ketubah, and they want to take a lot of the land and pass it on to the children to use it. And so the change in the ketubah would be that she would still be left with land, just not as much, but still perhaps it's enough that she doesn't need to worry about it, right? But the halacha is going to be the same as whether this is a case of somebody who's very, very rich with a lot of land, or even a small amount of land, because again, halachically it has to do with the real property and the transfer and the change and the encumbrance, and that's the point. But you could see where, just like over here, a case where somebody would actually accept it and agree with that, right? Because you want to imagine, well, what's the other case? Why would somebody ever agree to that? And so that's a scenario where somebody would be amenable and agreeable to it, and not confrontational about it, to have that kind of change. It's her children too, and she wants to pass something off to the kids, and they have so much that they want the kids to have a lifetime of themselves having a lot of kids and being able to support them, and they don't want to wait until another 20 or 30 years, and the kids meanwhile have to struggle. And that's why she would accept it. So let's but again, halachically, even the smaller amount of land is still going to be subject to this, and she has to accept the arrangement. That's the deal. The Gemara is gonna explain the Mishnah, where it says Rabbi Akiva says land of any size whatsoever is subject to the requirement of Peah. And the Gemara and the sugya is going to try to analyze this ruling and try to figure out how much that could be. Could it really be this minuscule amount? So Rabbi Imi asked in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and Shimon ben Lakish is effectively saying, think about it. The statement of Rabbi Akiva means that even a piece of land that had room for a single ear of grain is subject to the requirement of Peah. So how can this be, right? So the sugya continues. It says, as long as he did not cut it, there was no Peah obligation under it, or no Peah obligation. But once he cut it, there's nothing remaining to leave as Peah. So we know that cutting the first stalk is what triggers the Peah obligation. And now Shimon ben Lakish is saying that Rabbi Akiva is saying that even a piece of land that has a single room for a single ear is going to be subject, even if that you'd say, well, you don't have enough, you don't have two, right? You don't have one to cut and one to leave as Peah. They're saying no, even that amount that's just for one stalk will trigger it. How can that be? How can it be? So the Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say, Rabbi Hanania said in the name of Rabbi Pinchas, interpret Rabbi Akiva's statement as referring to a piece of land which had room for a single stalk, and the stalk had 5 ears growing from it. So that's going to be like this very special stalk of wheat. It's not just a single one, but has these 5 clusters growing from it. And if you want to know why 5, why the Gemara is mentioning 5 ears, you have to look at the Tosfot Anshe Shem. And basically what the Tosfot over there is saying is that he's saying that you want to leave enough at the end of it for a respectable gift. And basically the farmer, just to bring up what the Pnei Moshe explains, basically if the farmer does not initially cut the entire stalk at the base, but first he cuts one ear, he must leave at least one ear uncut as Peah. So in order to trigger that, you're basically cutting off from the stalk. You're not cutting the stalk, you're cutting one ear off. And that you have to leave one ear uncut as Peah, so that's 2 ears. And then you're harvesting the rest, so that you have to have at least, they're saying is a quantity of 3 to harvest, so that they're doing something where they're not saying, well, I'm only going to leave one kernel of grain for the poor person. They're saying, no, it has to be something respectable. It has to at least be like one of these ears. And they're saying that that's the minimum amount that's going to be subject to Peah for land. Now notice in the last Mishnah they were talking about a handful, that you have to leave at least a handful for Peah. And Rabbi Akiva is pointing out that no, even if you're harvesting from curses and you have no produce, and the produce is very meager, and it's not enough to gather handfuls because you are cursed and you're doing all sorts of averot and you're not making tshuva, that even though you still have to leave Peah. So in the version of Rabbi Akiva, and in the version that we looked at yesterday, which was that Rabbi Yeshua ben Basira, who's saying that no, you have to have these like big handfuls that are grown from simcha. Rabbi Akiva is pointing out that that's not correct. That's not the halacha. That even if you're harvesting from curses and there's very little to take, you're still obligated to leave Peah to the poor. That your bad harvest is your issue. Don't burden the poor person with it. That if you're doing so little in your growing, and it's because of your curses and you're not blessed, well, you can't cheat the poor person out of that either. You still have to give it. So that we should learn from this that even the poor people today who make money, you still have to leave truma and meiser. You still have to give charity. So what Rabbi Akiva is pointing out, this very clever insight, that is to cut off this argument to say, oh, I don't make enough money to give charity. According to the difference between Rabbi Akiva's view of this and Rabbi Yeshua ben Basira's view, according to Rabbi Akiva, he's saying, yeah, even if you're cursed and there's very little left and you barely have enough to grab by the hand, you still have to leave Peah. You still have to leave charity to the poor, even from that. Even from that. What a deep idea. So the Gemara is gonna ask a question on the wording of this statement. Okay? And this is going to be posed by Rabbi Mana, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, one of the last Amorim commentators in the one of the last Amorim in the Yerushalmi. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in the north, and he's going to ask a question. And we're going to look to one of the modern people to explain it so that it's kept in context with the Yerushalmi. Keep in mind, Rabbi Mana may not be making a statement with this. It might just be a question. Okay? Rabbi Mana asked, but we did not state here that standing grain of any amount whatsoever is subject to the Peah requirement. In other words, he's saying that we're talking about land of any size being subject to it. So basically, they're saying, well, why didn't the Mishnah mention land when the land is what a person must leave Peah from his standing grain, even if he does not own the land underneath it. So that even if he owns no land, he must still leave. He must still be obligated in Peah, and the Mishnah should have stated land of any size is subject to Peah. And instead, maybe it should have said that standing grain of any size is subject to Peah. In other words, he's asking a question about why isn't it talking about standing grain of any size? Why specifically land? What's the insight here? Why didn't it just say standing grain if that's what it's going to be? The Gemara is going to answer it. It's going to say it was only because the Mishnah taught in Bikurim, the law in Bikurim, where one must indeed own land in order to be obligated, that it's mentioned land. So let me read that again. The Gemara answer says it was only because the Mishnah taught the law of Bikurim, where one must own land in order to be obligated, that it mentioned land, also regarding Peah. So in the Mishnah in Bikurim, in chapter 1, Halacha 1, it's going to derive that you must own the land in order to be obligated in Bikurim, and we're looking at the verse in Exodus 23:19 that talks about Bikurim, saying the first ripening fruits of your ground. So that it's saying, well, this is benefiting our Mishnah to teach that land of any size suffices for the obligation. So since the Tana wanted to include both Peah and Bikurim in one list, he ended up stating land of any size suffices for both of them. So we can see like that that because it is not necessary to own the actual land in order to be obligated in Peah, that that's why this question comes up, because effectively what Rabbi Manna is saying, well, what if you don't own the land and you just have the stalk? Are you still obligated? So I want to look at the Rosh Cirillo's explanation of this, and the Rosh Cirillo is going to explain this sugya in the following way. It's going to explain that Rabbi Manna here is posing a question on the immediately preceding reply about this land, and Rabbi Hananya, when we were talking about the Rabbi Hananya, who was talking in the name of Rabbi Pinchas, who was interpreting Rabbi Akiva's statement about a piece of land which had room for a single stalk. So he's interpreting it as saying Rabbi Hananya interpreted the Mishnah as referring to land that produced a stalk that had many ears, and Rabbi Manna is asking that if so, the Mishnah should have substituted the term standing grain for the term land, because the term standing grain is used only when there's more than one ear, and thus if the Mishnah is necessarily referring to such a case, it should have used this term. The Gemara is going to answer, and it's going to say that the term land was used by the Mishnah and is also discussing Bikurim, because with regard to Bikurim, one is obligated, even if there's only one ear of grain for the Bikurim, and by the way, you have to own the land in order to give Bikurim, because it says your land there. So there's another comment here that I found really interesting here. The Tiferes Yisrael is going to dispute this, and they're going to interpret the Mishnah as referring to a case where the buyer bought land underneath, and like perhaps in the case of trees, and he just didn't buy the land between the trees, like what we were talking about with the nursery. In other words, he just bought the trees, but not the land. So the buyer is going to be obligated in the law of Peah because he owns the ground out of which the trees grow, and he must separate Peah for each tree because he does not own the land in between the trees. And it should be noted that according to the interpretation of the Mishnah given by the Rambam, that the Mishnah has no bearing upon this issue. So that's another interpretation to help us to explain it within terms of the nurseries that we were talking about. In the case of the nurseries, the person who buys the tree can separate the Peah, but in terms of a financial obligation, that there has to be a reimbursement by the seller to the buyer for the Peah, even if the buyer leaves the Peah. So there's another suggestion that the Rambam is holding, that there is no Peah obligation without land ownership, and it's for this very reason that that the Mishnah, according to the Rambam, mentions about land. So a few different ways to look at this, and it's all pretty interesting. So the Gemara is going to cite a brisa that adds to the list, the Mishnah's list of laws that one becomes subject to on account of owning land of any size whatsoever. In this case, like a postage stamp sized piece of land. So the brisa taught an appearance in the temple of the pilgrimage festivals in Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And this implies that one who does not own land at all is not obligated to appear in the temple on the holidays. So the Gemara is going to bring up a brisa, but I want to explain this before you take it literally. So let's read it, and I'll give you an explanation. Rabbi Yossi says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, one who does not own land is exempt from appearing in the temple on the pilgrimage festivals. So just keep in mind, Rambam in Hilchas Hagiga 2:1 is the opinion that the Halacha does not follow this view, and he's understanding here that Rabbi Yochanan is only explaining the opinion of a brisa. However, the Mishnah, which did not include appearance in the temple in the list, disagrees with the brisa, and it maintains that even one who does not own land must come to the temple on the festivals. So they're including the brisa to talk about it. It's there. But trying to understand this cryptic brisa, that's going to be another issue. The Rambam is saying that Rabbi Yochanan is just bringing it up, but he doesn't agree that that's the halacha. The Gemara is going to wonder why another case was not added to the list. And again, Rabbi Mana comes along and asks, but why should we not say that one who does not own land is exempt from the Meiser confession? For it is written scripturally that you have the confession text, and the sugya says, and the ground which you have given us. That's part of the text. You know, we know that comes from Devarim 26:15, and it says, and the ground which you've given us, and that's part of the scripturally mandated confession text when you separate the Meiser. So evidently, the text is going to presuppose that the person who's confessing this owns land. That's what it looks like. And if being obligated in this law is indeed dependent upon ownership of land, certainly any amount of land is going to suffice. For the Torah does not specify a minimum size, so why is the Meiser confession not listed among the other laws that one becomes subject to if one owns any amount of land whatsoever? Why are these two things not mentioned? So the Gemara does not answer the question, and instead it corroborates the premise upon which the question is based. So Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Bun, says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the accepted teaching is so that one who does not own land is exempt from the Meiser confession, for it is written, and the ground which you have given us. The Torah uses the word us. So since the Gemara is stating that this is the accepted teaching, it would appear that the halacha is in accordance with this view, despite the fact that Rabbi Mana's question is left unanswered. This is, look, there's a lot of notes and documents, and we know that this is not the halacha either for the Meiser confession or for appearing at the temple. So why is this in here? What's going on here? What a big puzzle. And I want to point to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in his Biur, and he's gonna suggest that that there's other Rishonim who understand uh, that Rabbi Yochanan is not confirming Rabbi Mana's premise, and to the contrary, he's going to be refuting it, and he's going to be but the reading of these two brises, you could read it in terms of saying like, oh, I have a brisa here that's saying that you have to own land in order to do meiser, and that's really according to what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is pointing out, that's not really the way it should be read. And I want to read you what he writes, and you'll see something that becomes very clear, and you can see the point. So you could look at it. You could look at this Gemara where it's explained in accordance with the apparent meaning that Rabbi Yochanan is confirming Rabbi Mana's presence, that one who does not own land is not required to recite the Meiser confession. And we know that Rashi in Kiddushin 26a states that such a person is required to recite the Meiser confession. He explains that the phrase "the ground which you have been given, which you have given us," does not imply that the confessor owns land, because the word "us" is referring to the entire Jewish nation who was given Eretz Yisrael. So this halakhic opinion, this halakhic position, is going to be implicit in the sugya, and it's according to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He's suggesting that all these Rishonim who are saying that that actually Rabbi Yochanan is not confirming Rabbi Mana's question or premise, but to the contrary, they're refuting it, and they're refuting this Baraisa, that their reading says Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, this whole text by Rabbi Yochanan is posing a rhetorical question in response as follows. And effectively, to simplify it, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is saying that is the accepted teaching so that one who does not own land is exempt from the Meiser confession? Certainly not. For it is written, and the ground which you have given us. And since the text says us in the plural, it evidently refers to the Jewish people and their collective ownership of Eretz Yisrael, and not to the individual confessor or any land that they may own. And there is no reason to assume that one who does not own land is exempt from the Meiser confession, or is limited to the number of times that they can go up to the temple, by the way. So I think that's a very neat explanation from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in his Biur, and to explain this deeper point by Rabbi Yochanan, and I think that sheds light on why the Bryce is included, and it gives an alternate thing. You could say that, oh well, the Gemara, if I'm going to use Gezerah Shavas here and I'm going to read it in a literalist way, would be saying that appearing at the temple and also the Meiser confession, you have to own land. And by the way, we know that somebody who converts doesn't own land because they're not part of a tribe. So only tribe people would be able to own land and would be able to go to the temple and give Meiser. And we know that that's not true. We know that somebody who converts can go to the temple, and we know that they can give Meiser. So that's really not the reading of it, and that's why this Baraisa gets included here, because it's trying to refute that sort of reading where you're going with a literalist reading, and you're not going with the tradition. And in the tradition, every Jewish male, convert or not, is required to go up for the holidays of the foot, and is also required to do Meiser. And this would be a way to distort the law and read it in a way where that would not be correct. And so that's a very simple reason why these two things are not included in the list of what Rabbi Akiva gives, because how could it be? How could it be? It's not. It's not. A requirement for owning land in order to do those things. So the Gemara is going to go back to this source of the previous ruling that one who does not own land is not required to come to the temple on the festivals. Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, one who does not own land is exempt from appearing in the temple on the pilgrimage festivals. As is stated, no man shall covet your land when you go up to appear before Hashem, your God, 3 times a year. And this verse implies that the mitzvah can come to come to the temple is only addressed to those who own the land. So if you look in the Bavli in Pesachim 8a, you can see a lot of commentary and explanation on that. So what's going on here? And this is going to get into a slightly different thing, right? So it cited the verse which guarantees security for people who leave their homes unattended while traveling to the temple for the festival pilgrimage. And the Gemara is going to go forward and relate various incidents who illustrate this guarantee. So really what's happening here is that statement about appearing at the temple, right? That doesn't, you're not supposed to read it as, oh, if you don't have land, you can't go to the temple. That's not what it's saying, right? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying is that when you have the mitzvah to come to the temple, okay, it's not saying that it's only to the people who own land, that it's having this guarantee that your homes and your property is going to be protected while you're going. That's what it's trying to teach. So this is going to get into a list of 4 incidents that are very deep and amazing, that we know that there's divine reward and there's divine punishment. And we know that if you do a mitzvah, that there's a reward for it and that there's consequence for it. And if you do a sin, you are making somewhere in the universe a consequence for yourself. That's how the universe is written. That as the Rambam writes in Moreh Nevuchim, that there's somewhere in the laws of nature there's virtue, and that your action has consequence. There's no such thing in Judaism as action not having consequence. So the Torah comes and says part of your purpose as a Jew and part of your point of existence is to go on the festival pilgrimage, and it's giving you a guarantee not to worry about it, not to worry about this thing. You're going to have this special protection for doing a mitzvah. And I want all of us to get more encouraged and to have more emunah about trying to do mitzvot and trying to follow the word of Hashem and trying to follow what the sages are showing us, because that somewhere in the laws of nature you're going to have this special protection, and that it's going to even be beyond or above what nature would be. And that's what this is trying to show us. It's trying to show us the special relationship that the Jew has in this world when you're doing what Hashem's will was, and you're doing your part to perfect the divine plan and to be a part of the divine plan and to enact it. And part of that is going to the temple. So what happens when you have when you're a Jew and you're fulfilling this, and what's going to happen when somebody tries to covet your home and your property? So here's the first instance on the protection, the special protection that the Jew who leaves his home gets when he goes to the temple to do Hashem's will and follow the word of Hashem and to connect with Hashem. The sugya says it once happened with an individual who left his heap of produce unattended in his field when he made the pilgrimage. And when he came back, he found lions surrounding it to protect it from robbers. Wow. So we see that the lions came to protect the property. And by the way, this was even movable property because this was detached. It wasn't just physical property. And I want you to really notice that, because you'd say, oh, it must be physical property that gets protected. No, even this heap of produce that's left unattended in the field, that got special protection too. The movable property got special protection. And we see that the act of the Jew trying to perfect the world by carrying out the divine plan and following the mitzvot and doing the mitzvot, that it's above nature and that you're going to have these things that happen in your life that are even above nature. And in this case, he found lions coming to protect from robbers for this movable property. Wow, really that should give us a lot of chizuk to try to do mitzvot with more sincerity. And the second instance says it once happened with an individual who left a chicken coop unattended while he made the pilgrimage. And when he came back, he found wild cats laying torn apart before the chickens. Rabbi Kanievsky, in his Biur, says that miraculously the chickens had defended themselves against the predatory wild cats and tore them apart. So that again, that the act of a Jew trying to do the will of Hashem and to do a positive mitzvah, and again, we know there's divine reward and there's divine punishment, that it can even be where it's above nature, that the act of the Jew doing the divine will can even do things where the results will be above nature. So we have to all be more into doing mitzvahs with that kind of intent, and trying to do the will of Hashem with that kind of intent. And by the way, trying to stay away from sin, because we also can get abnormal things that can come to us as well. So the Jew is very powerful, and we have to really chase after mitzvahs because we're part of the creation. We have to affect Hashem's will and carry it out. All a mitzvah is in the Torah is a reflection of the will of God. And so that's why you're getting this special protection when you're doing it. When you're forgetting about your chickens and you're going and you're doing it, you're going to have this special help. Now, a third incident. A certain individual left his house open when he made his pilgrimage. And when he came back, he found a snake coiled around the lock of the door to guard against any intruder. Again, that's truly above nature. The snake itself, the nature itself, became a guardian for this Jew who was going to do a mitzvah, who was going to help to perfect creation and to carry out Hashem's plan. And a fourth incident. Don't forget, we have free will, so we can choose not to do mitzvahs. We can choose to sin as much as we want. But whenever we choose to sin, or we choose to do the right thing, that there is divine reward and there's divine punishment, and we are living in a world of consequences. And so what the sugya in a most beautiful way is trying to show us, is trying to encourage us, please, Mr. Jew, run to do mitzvahs. Stay away from sin and run to do the word of Hashem and to follow the sages and to follow what you're supposed to do as a Jew And don't be afraid for your property because you're going to get special help. It shouldn't get in the way. And here's the fourth incident. Rabbi Pinchas related the following incident. Two brothers in Ashkelon had Gentile neighbors. Keep in mind, Ashkelon was a mixed city. Half of it was not Jewish, and half of it was not conquered. The area by the sea is not conquered, by the way, and also technically, if you can see the sea there in Ashkelon, the laws for shvius and produce doesn't follow the rest of Eretz Yisrael. So there's a lot of Gentile neighbors there, and Ashkelon is there. And the Gentile neighbors said, when these Jews go to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage, we will enter their homes and take for themselves everything they own. And when the Jews went to Jerusalem, says the sugya, the Holy One, blessed is He, prepared for the Jews angels of their likeness who would enter and leave the premises, so that the Gentile neighbors had the false impression that the Jews never left. And the sugya continues and says, when the Jews descended from Jerusalem and returned home, they sent their Gentile neighbors presents. And the Gentile neighbors said to them, where were you? And the Jews responded, we were in Jerusalem. And the Gentiles said to them, but whom did you leave behind in your house in your absence? And the Jews replied, no one. And the Gentiles then responded, blessed is the God of the Jews, who did not leave them this time and will not leave them in the future. Now, that's really an amazing ending, because really you're doing a Kiddush Hashem, and anytime that you can do a Kiddush Hashem and you can get non-Jews to bless the God of Israel, that is something that is at a very high level, and the Gemara and the Shas regards that as being very valuable. Part of doing a Kiddush Hashem is to get the non-Jews to bless the God of Israel. And because we're supposed to be a light unto the nations, and when we do Kiddush Hashem and the nations get one step closer to knowing Kodesh Baruch Hu, and when they get closer to Kodesh Baruch Hu, they'll start to keep the 7 Noahide laws, and they'll help to perfect the creation and to stay away from all sorts of sexual immorality and stay away from theft and murder and all sorts of immoral behavior. So that's why the Jew has to be the leader at following the mitzvot and following and doing the right kind of behavior and in following the way of the Torah, so that he can lead humanity to this higher level consciousness that's going to be when we perfect reality and we have Hashem's blueprint down here on earth where everybody's following it, and we are perfecting the world. So this is a very deep ending to this part. We're going to get into movable property tomorrow to finish up the rest of Halacha 7. But I just want you to walk away today and to reflect on the power of what kind of help you're going to get when you're doing the will of Hashem, when you're making your will Hashem's will. We know that in Avot, that you're going to get this special help when you are making your will Hashem's will. And that's what we see here with the pilgrimage. Thank you.